Good morning. At this time, I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Retail Committee of the City Council of Palo Alto for Wednesday, October 16th, 2024. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Chair Koo, Councilmember Burt,
Here.
Councilmember Lithcott-Hames.
Here.
For the record, two are present.
And I'd just like to add for the record that we're starting a little late because we were having video technical difficulties, and Chair Koo has been trying to join us, and hopefully she'll be able to do so shortly. All right. So this morning we have first an opportunity for members of the public to speak on items that are not on the agenda but are within the purview of this committee. And do we have any speakers on open comment?
Yes, we have one speaker. 1 second, please. Our first speaker is Stephen L.
Ahead of the study session, I thought I would share how my family and what I see our neighbors use downtown. I've worked downtown for 55 years and we've lived here for 20 years. We use and appreciate the neighborhood serving retail. For us, that's Whole Foods and CVS and Ace Hardware. We use every day coffee shops and restaurants, and every day most of our residents in our condo work at home, and I see folks all over bringing in coffee cups and stuff. I don't know whether the restaurants and cafes with cost rising are making money, but they are pretty busy and a large share of our revenue. We use lots of neighborhood serving services. Places like the cell phone stores and Apple and the jewelry stores, and for others, the bicycle shop where you can both buy something. But more important, most of the use is getting stuff repaired. We use cleaners and the sewing shops. We actually use a nail salon and a spa. Downtown serves us really pretty well. What we don't use, and we see going away because, as Councilmember Burt has said often, there are many reasons why downtown is not competitive with Town and Country and Stanford Shopping Center. We can walk to Town and Country or go easily to Stanford Shopping Center. We shop online. What we don't use or need are a lot of stores selling stuff that we can get other places. I know there's a lot of comments about how horrible it is downtown. I've walked these streets every day for 55 years. I feel safe, even though I don't see well enough to drive. I see lots of people coming, older folks at the Stanford Theater. I hope in the engagement process, in the study session, you find positive ways to fill the vacant spaces. I just, as a resident and seeing what our neighbors do, it's probably not going to be retail stores that we can get otherwise. But I'll stay around for a little while and hear the stakeholder thing. I think that's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the open public comments.
Sorry, we have one more speaker.
One more.
Our
All
next
right.
speaker is John S.
Let's sneak in here. John Shank with Thwaites, and I'm excited to be here today for the agenda item, and it's somewhat related, but it's not on the agenda. I just want to mention to you guys, I've mentioned to Stephen that I feel like we're probably just over the line. I've been hoping more focus would be on, which is the new parklets and what's happening. And so people are pulling permits, and I've seen one get started across the street from my office on Emerson. I know others are. My concern is that our retailers still don't really understand the policy. It's on them. But the retailers, even my own retailers who are wanting these, are just wanting them. Just build it, go get a permit, hire a contractor, they get the permit. The retailer doesn't see what's happening. And I don't think they're getting built to the new policy. I think they'll get caught, at an inspection. I think you guys, the city needs an extra step of information to the retailers about what the parklets are. We suffer from a previous policy that was not enforced. There was, I almost want to say literally zero enforcement around numbers of tables and chairs, and the tables and chairs in between a parklet and the storefront and all these things. And I know many of them are thinking, well, we're just going back to that. Let's just hurry up, get this thing built, and we're back. And then if they're thinking, well, I'm going to spend all this money to have 30 more seats. But if we enforce the policy, which says 8 feet wide on the sidewalk and these things, maybe they get 15. And maybe they're like, now I have a problem. I spent all this money. I thought, city, you would do this for me. And you guys are going to hear from them later and be understandably inclined to then rethink the policies to bend to help the retailers. We all want to help the retailers, but I worry, I see this sort of building. And I think with more communication, the idea that they have to be ADA accessible, what's going to happen serving alcohol wise? It still feels like that's a temporary thing with the state. But when it gets enforced, are they still wanting to spend all this money to build these things if they really knew what the long-term utility was going to be? Anyway, I thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Sorry, one quick moment. That was our final speaker, and I just want to note that Chair Koo is present in the meeting, and I think
Great.
she would like to make an announcement.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Byrd, for starting the meeting. I was having difficulties with my internet, but I would like to invoke AB 2449. I'm away at the city, Cal City's conference in Long Beach, and so I'm having the meeting over here. At the same time, I do not have anybody under 18 attending the meeting. And because I'm not there, Councilmember Byrd and Councilmember Lithcott-Hames, Councilmember Byrd, can you please look at the room and also help me with chairing the meeting so that we can have it go smoothly, because I think the item 1 and item 2 is pretty important to make sure that we have the right people provide input. Thank you.
Okay. So would you like to go ahead and take over chair at this time?
Yeah, but if you will help me
Yeah.
with seeing who is
Yeah,
in the room.
I will.
Okay,
And
thank
your
you.
volume's a little low. I don't know if we can. Oh, I guess we're working on it.
Okay, because
Maybe from our end, but anything anybody can do would be helpful.
okay.
All right. I'll turn it over to you for item 1.
Thank you so much, Councilmember.
There we go.
Very good. We'll move into action items. Action item number 1, discussion of the future study session on filling retail vacancies. And I'll hand it back to staff.
Thank you, Chair Koo. Good morning, Retail Committee members. Steve Guagliardo, Assistant to the City Manager, responsible for coordinating the city's economic development function. So the first item we have for you is in response to a number of conversations that have happened at Retail Committee since it started meeting as a Brown Act body in March regarding retail vacancies in town, especially in our commercial cores. One of the things we've heard loud and clear from the Retail Committee and from members of our business community and other stakeholders is the desire to engage in this in a constructive and participatory manner. The Retail Committee meetings to date have set up those conversations with folks, and we've been able to have limited back and forth. But what we're really looking for is options for a study session to engage in a more substantive manner than what we've been able to do so far. So the discussion today is about planning for the planned November study session on addressing retail vacancies. So we go to the next slide. Addressing retail vacancies in town is something that can be done not only with communication and collaboration with our private sector partners, but through partnership with those same folks. This requires engagement, and this requires a clear understanding of what that engagement can look like. So what we're proposing is a study session at the November 20th Ad Hoc Retail Committee meeting to address retail vacancies, specifically in the downtown core and the California Avenue commercial core, trying to better understand the perceptions of stakeholders around retail, retail-like options, and our options for addressing those retail vacancies. Go to the next slide. To best engage stakeholders and promote the study session, it would be very helpful to get feedback from this committee and perspective on potential areas of discussion. Addressing retail vacancies is a fairly broad topic. It's sufficient for Brown Act noticing purposes, but there's a lot within that topic. It's everything from our entitlement or planning and development process, its uncertainty of plans and parking, its current trends in brick and mortar retail, as we heard a member of the public speak to during open comment, its discussion of a potential vacancy tax, which has come up with this committee multiple times. It could include interim activations of vacant storefronts, and it could include further discussion on the next iteration of the business improvement district. There's a lot within each of these topics. It's covered in the staff report. I'm happy to address comments and questions on them if retail committee members would like to engage further in them. But it would be very helpful to get perspective on narrowing down to a few of these topics to help promote the study session to stakeholders and help them understand what their value proposition for engagement is. If it's something on, say, a vacancy tax, it would be hearing their perspectives and understanding what their concerns might be with that, as well as a conversation about what that could look like going forward, timing, and other elements of it. If it was something like interim activations of vacant storefronts, staff would be happy to bring our partners from the public art program in and talk about what ideas they might have to partner with brokers and property owners to help activate those vacant storefronts. So really, depending on which potential areas of discussion the retail committee would like to engage in, it'll shape how we do our outreach, who we reach out to, and what the structure of the meeting could be. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about that structure of the meeting. It's important to remember that this is a Brown Act body, so we are required to comport with the requirements of the Brown Act. That said, we do have some flexibility for the structure of the meeting to better engage and get participation from stakeholders through a study session. As mentioned in the staff report, staff recommends a semi-structured discussion between ad hoc retail committee members and stakeholders. This could enable testimony from stakeholders and dialogue back and forth and actual discourse between the retail committee members and stakeholders. At the moment, the structure has been 3 minutes of public comment, a couple of responses from retail committee members, and then maybe some limited engagement. But this discussion could be structured to have a lot more back and forth and actual questions posed to stakeholders, their answering of those questions, and follow-up as deemed necessary by the retail committee. One alternative option could be a panel conversation. Staff identified this as an option, but it is not recommended. The reason it's not recommended is it narrows the engagement to the actual panelists. You would probably still do something like the public comment for everyone as required by the Brown Act, but you wouldn't be able to have as substantive a discourse, as qualitative a back and forth with folks, except for the members of the panel with this. With the goal of engagement, with the goal of partnership with our business community, staff really thinks the idea.
Steve?
Yep, I'm back. I was just waiting for there's a cell phone going off in chambers. Apologies, Chair. So with the goal of engagement and with the goal of participation and partnership with our business community, staff really wants to emphasize the opportunity with that more broader and more robust engagement rather than just a panel. So that's how staff landed on the recommendation for that semi-structured discussion. Again, feedback and perspective from members of the retail committee would be useful as we talk about that structure and format. If we go to the next slide, we'll talk about the participants. So very important to engage internally and externally here. We have members of our property owners here. We've had brokers participate in the past, and we've had existing retailers participate in retail committees meetings. It would be important to engage each of those sectors as we go forward. The photo on this slide is of Centennial Alley. It's a photo of the plaque that is there, and it really just shows the partnership that was used to achieve that, all of the different sectors that came together to reach that activation, and really all of the different sectors that are necessary for a conversation as robust as addressing retail vacancies. Internal stakeholders will be based on those potential areas of discussion. Economic development staff will participate. As mentioned, if there was interest in talking about, activating vacant storefronts with artwork or other elements, our public art staff would be able to participate. If there was further conversation wanted about our planning or development process, staff from planning and development services could participate. So just wanted to flag that there will be some coordination necessary here, and we will want to make sure we tailor the participants to those potential areas for discussion that the retail committee would like to explore. If we go to the next slide, just next steps. We're here today to get your feedback, hear your perspectives on this. Hopefully this addresses what we've heard from the retail committee in terms of getting to broader engagement, in terms of finding options that work for stakeholders to have more than just their 3 minutes of conversation. Following that, staff will work with the city attorney's office to structure the conversation appropriately. We'll reach out to stakeholders, we'll drum up the participation we can for it, and we'll prepare a report to go out in packet for the structure and those areas of discussion. That can also be used as a marketing tool in that outreach effort to make sure people understand what we're doing at that November 20th meeting. With that, staff is open for questions, comments, and further discussion.
Thank you so much. Let's go to public comments.
Yes.
Our first speaker is Stephen L.
Maybe harder. I'll leave the committee to decide how best to structure the study session. I want to thank staff, Steve, for being available to help me understand what's going on. I have 2 general principles that I wrote in the letter. One is thanking you for continuing the engagement. You had an incredibly successful engagement on the El Camino focus area that has led to now some actual proposals coming forward. So I think we're all learning that direct engagement is important. And that's because of the second point. Whether we say it enough or not, it remains true that applications, whether they're for housing or for filling the vacant spaces, only come forth if they make sense economically to the applicants. That's why you changed the zoning in the El Camino focus area and extended that to the GMROLM area. That's why in the past week or 2, the staff has come forward on the HIP with understanding that some of the current zoning and development standards aren't enough to make even the small projects economically feasible. So I'm really interested in hearing eventually from the property owners of these vacant spaces. I don't call them vacant retail vacancies. I call them local business vacancies because I'm not really sure what the definition of retail is. But I know that you will learn what they think is necessary to fill those spaces, which is what we want, with projects, activities that are economically and financially feasible to them. So thank you for kicking this off. I'll be back on November 20th, but engagement and financial feasibility, I think, are the real key to solving our problems. Thank you.
Our next speaker is John S.
Hello, John Schenk with Thwaites again. Not knowing how today's meeting is really going to go, I will try to touch on these 6 points quickly. I think entitlement and development processes they're kind of ripe. I think a lot of people like to target them. I would not say it's our greatest problem. Uncertainty of access and parking, that's a big one. Back to retail focus. Retailers that I meet with, prospective retailers to come to the downtown, want to know where's the parking, what's the deal with parking. I don't think it's on here, but back to my earlier comment on parklets, a significant issue that is raised these days is, can my neighbor put a parklet in front of me? And the answer, of course, is yes. And that's a huge impediment for some, especially those retailers that I think you guys would put in the bucket of mom and pop, small retailer. They can't play well, then I'll put a parklet there and spend the $100,000 to build one to keep it from being a restaurant space in front of me. We love restaurants. I built the first 2 parklets in the downtown, and when COVID hit, I think it's a great idea. I think having it in front of somebody else, even without a roof or whatever, they are just dirty. Stuff gets left around at night. When we can say we're going to police this, we don't. We never have, and we're not going to be good at it. So the impact on a retailer is huge. It's preemptive to, well, then I just won't go here. What about a site? Is there somewhere where somebody couldn't do it in the downtown? Well, no. This is our policy. We really have to look at that. I'm begging you to relook at that. Trends in retail, I think that goes to the retail zoning ordinance and the uses that are allowed without having to go to a CUP and other things. We've got to do that. It's just, there's low-hanging fruit that's been there for years. Why can't we have a little bank branch that has a coffee shop inside like other downtowns? Well, it's a bank. We don't allow banks. We can't do it. We can't have a little real estate office of somebody who sells pet food in a little shop, not a huge Petco on the University Avenue, but there's just low-hanging fruit. The brokers have said it, the consultants have said it, we need to do it. Is that my time?
You have 30 more seconds.
I'm sorry. Potential vacancy tax, I would just say park that and have that be last. The worst thing you could do is start saying, oh, let's do a vacancy tax before we fix the zoning code, before we clarify parklets, before we do any of these other things. Activating storefronts, I think it should be an encourage property owners to do it. I think engaging the arts committee and all these things to come to a property owner and say, here, this artist is going to put this in your window. It's not going to work. We might not like it. It might not go with the rest of the building. It might be offensive to some and not others. I think bringing in a third party to put art in,
Your
not a
time
good
is up.
idea. Thanks.
That was our final speaker for this item.
Thank you. Thanks, members, for speaking. Councilmember Burt, will you manage this part of it for the council discussion and questions?
Sure.
Thank you.
Julie, did you want to kick off?
Thank you, Steve and team, for putting this together. I really enjoyed reading the staff report, and thanks to the members of the public who have shared their thoughts. I think it's incredibly exciting that we're going to do a study session. And my first question is really sort of how much time are we allotting for the November 20th meeting? Because there's so much richness in this report, and I worry that we've got a great idea and we're stuffing it into a very small amount of time. And so I might want to suggest that we be flexible about perhaps extending the length of this November 20 meeting. It would be such a shame to trumpet the study session, invite stakeholders, and feel very limited and curtailed, particularly from members of our retail and property owning community. So I wondered if that was is potentially possible.
Yes, staff, I think, is happy to work with the retail committee on any time constraints or parameters there. I think through discussion today, we're hoping to better understand those potential areas for discussion and just how robust we want to go. To your point, scaling and aligning the time we have for those areas for discussion, I think is very important. If we're able to pick, say, 2 areas of discussion that we wanted to emphasize, we would try to find the time to accommodate that versus we want a more free-ranging discussion and flexing it a little bit more that way. I think the goal would be to have that robust participation. And so I do think we would look at extending the time and being very clear about what time we have allotted for it.
Okay, I love the notion that we can extend the time, and I guess that's because when I looked at your potential areas for conversation, I was saying yes to pretty much all of them, and appreciate the comments from John Schenk about how he would prioritize them, and I imagine there's going to be myriad thoughts on that, and again, it feels that we're opening up an expansive conversation. I worry that we will shut it down prematurely by narrowing the topic. So I would be in favor of including all of them, frankly, or most of them, and expanding the meeting time and really having a deep dive study session. I will proceed with my thoughts on the topics. Let's see here. I note that so I'm excited about the entitlement planning and development process being looked at. We're very much underway with that. And I think we just need to further air the concerns there, the uncertainty on parking and parklets, trends in brick and mortar. I would say that national and state trends in brick and mortar feel less relevant to me than local. We have a pretty vibrant, unique economic engine here in the Valley and in the Bay. And I think I would choose to narrow that topic in that regard, if there's interest in that. In terms of the potential vacancy tax, obviously, yes, it feels like something to be parked, as John Schenk put it. Why put a punishment in place when we haven't even opened up the zoning? I do think that if and when we have that subject in front of us, we've got to have somebody come and speak to the benefits of a property tax, some analysis someone else has done about why it works or what it achieves, whether that's a retail economist or someone from another city coming in and, explaining conceptually how it works. I think we're anticipating the negative from our stakeholders, very rightly so. If somebody else has done it, there's clearly a reason they're doing it. I'd love to be sure the positives are properly presented alongside. In terms of the activations of vacant storefronts, super excited by this, but I do think there's a really vast difference between putting art up on somebody's windows and activating micro business pop-ups. The Street Sense report, I'm pretty sure it was Street Sense that would have suggested this, right? That, when I was reading that report a year and a half ago, I found that incredibly enticing because we have such an entrepreneurial spirit here. We have so many people trying to start things and they lack the capital to kind of really get it going. But we've got these vacancies. It just felt like a win-win that clearly is happening in other areas. So putting art up is a very different way to handle a vacancy than filling that with a pop-up micro business. One is sort of papering over, nothing to look at here, or pretty things to look at while there's no retail happening inside, versus there is retail happening inside. You just may never have heard of it. It's kind of funky just getting off the ground. So I don't love the fact that they're kind of subsumed under one bullet. They both address the vacancy issue, but they address it really differently. One actually contributes to the economic engine potentially if we had some successful micro pop-ups. So I didn't want to lose them. They got one little sentence at the bottom of that bullet. And to me, that's just as exciting, if not more exciting for different reasons than the public art. I am a huge fan of the public art as well. In terms of the structure and format of the study session, I do appreciate your recommendation that we have a semi-structured discussion that is appropriately, we have the questions in advance or however we do it so that it's Brown Act compliant. And that's my technical question for you. Assuming we go that route, which I do believe is the way to really stimulate the conversation, do we have to, for Brown Act purposes, have the questions figured out and they go in the agenda? And is that something we would figure out today here as a committee? If so, or would we ask staff to handle that?
I'll take a crack at it and then I'll look to our representative from the attorney's office to weigh in. I think what would be very helpful from this committee right now is the types of information on those topics that you're interested in. So it's perspective on, how to do this. Is this, should we do this? Feedback on it, current context, opportunities for improvement, and, if there's some other flavor of information that you want within those topics. Within that, that's enough information for us, I think, to be able to move forward. And then we can, work to craft questions that elicit those types of information. But Tim, if you want to weigh in, happy to hear any feedback you have.
So that's generally right. Just like any other agenda, your really specific questions don't have to be on there. But of course, the more notice we can give the public about, in general, what you're talking about and what you'd like to elicit from them, the more they can come prepared.
Thank you. And obviously, the topics are key. The outreach is the other. There's the topics, there's the structure of the day or the morning or whatever we end up doing. And then there's outreach, so that people come. And I know that we are getting better and better and better at engaging our partners in the business community. I wonder how we will promote this to members of the public, to consumers. To Steve Levy's point, he came in saying, I've lived here 55 years, I shop. He explained, his engagement with our local stores. And it seems to me that that's an important perspective as well, maybe a little bit more wide ranging, because it's just people with their opinions based on their lifestyle. But I think it might really gain us a lot of traction in the community to signal that their participation is necessary in this, because their participation is ultimately needed in purchasing goods and services in our city. So I just want to be sure that the sort of broad members of the public are not overlooked as we do our outreach, and would love your thoughts on how you would engage the public who may not be attuned to a retail committee meeting agenda the way our business partners are.
Sure. So this is a topic that I was considering as we were working through how to structure this study session. And I think it does get back to the purpose a little bit. And you bring up an important point that in the partnership between the city and the private sector, we still need those patrons to actually be spending their dollars. So I think there are opportunities through communication channels like Uplift Local that traditionally go out to residents, but do not traditionally feature information about retail committee. I think there's an opportunity to reach out to Palo Alto neighborhoods and other groups, as well as community leaders like Steve and others, to remind them that there's an opportunity to participate here and that their perspective is important. I think one of the nuances to that is that we have a number of forums for communication with residents on these topics through various channels, including communication directly with you as council members. And one of the areas in my remit is enhancing that engagement with businesses. And so as we talk about the purpose of the study session, what information we want and from whom, I just want to keep that in mind as well. And I fully appreciate your point that they're a part of the conversation. I just want to make sure that as we market it, we position it appropriately so people understand the value.
I get that. I appreciate it. That's it for me, Pat. Thank you.
Thanks. So I think that we may want to do a couple go rounds of this. So my first questions and comments have to do with the form and the content of the study session. And if we're really looking to have dialogue, but do so in a way that is not a free-for-all, and that people, don't arrive and assume that everybody who shows up is going to sit at the same table and have that opportunity. It seems that we'd have a hybrid of open comments from the public and maybe a couple go rounds depending on the subtopics even. But then designate a group of stakeholder representatives that would be on the panel at the table throughout the discussion. And that would be my preference. And when I think about who the categories that those might be in, it would be goods retailers, property owners, food and beverage representatives, brokers, neighbors, as in residents. And then even within the brokers, I'm not sure whether it's local brokers and more regional retail experts who bring an even broader perspective on what we'd be doing. And then as far as the content, which then also drives the length of time on this, these are a lot of important subjects, and I agree that all of them are appropriate, and perhaps others. And so I'm trying to envision how much time it's going to have require to have really meaningful, not only discussion, but moving toward consensus. And those may be in two different meetings. It's going to take a while to just air and airing all the different points of view and information that we're trying to get on the table, which then goes into the problem solving and consensus. And so we may want to anticipate that we've got to have two of these and not too spread apart. And even the first one, with the breadth of topics, I'm having trouble envisioning be less than 3 hours. Okay, sounds like I'm seeing nodding heads, Lydia, and just so what you can't see, and sounds like we have some consensus there. And then one of the things that we need, there's also, what are the inputs to the meeting? So that we begin with shared information. And one of the things that John Schenk was just talking about was streamlining our zoning code and permitting processes. And it strikes me that probably even engaged stakeholders don't know that we have on, I think it's October 20th, is October 20th, that going on consent, which surprised me.
It'll be November 18th.
November
is
18th.
the planned date.
A set of updates to the zoning code you're talking about, those that reflect what the planning commission, and we had some discussions, planning commission. I'm surprised on consent, not because I want to re-question it, but just because it's an important item that I suspect there will be a desire by council members and the public to be able to wade in on. So I look forward to us being able to move forward on that, which ties into one of my other issues is how do we be able to move more quickly in actual decision-making and implementation? And I think this has to be a reflection of the council, the stakeholders, and the staff. And we as a council can look at what we have to do to arrive at decisions. Stakeholders, I think, many would like us to be able to move more rapidly. And we need to have staff really reflect on how we can move more quickly within our own bureaucracy. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way. It is what it is. To be able to move more quickly on actions through our staff under the city manager, all the departments, and the legal staff. And we do have a circumstance where we have needed for the last several years to move more rapidly than we have, and not just in this downtown, but on Cal Ave and elsewhere in the city. And going forward, we need to. So I think that needs to be a real reflection. And one of the asks I would have of an input, one of the topic areas, which is how do we do things more quickly? Let me turn it over to Lydia, and then I've got some other things on a next go round, but it kind of gets tiring when one of us speaks too long at a time. Lydia, you want to chime in?
Thank you, Councilmember Burt. You know, I also have the same questions, you know, and directives for the meeting in November, making sure that it is more inclusive. So the main thing is, what is the communication method in getting the meeting out, so the study session out to the public, especially the stakeholders, right? So I know that, Steve, you have a list, but what other ways can we make sure that it is a lot more robust in attendance and participation? So I'd like to ask you that.
Sure. So if there's one thing I've learned in this role, it's that it's about relationships as much as anything else. Chair, as you just alluded to, we do have a list of folks that we send our Business Connect newsletter out to. That is in augmentation to outreach. That is not the outreach. The outreach really would consist of smiling and dialing, as I like to call it, making the phone calls and reaching out specifically to the individuals who have participated here constructively in the past, asking them for other members of their networks, asking them to encourage them to participate as well. If the retail committee so chooses to pursue that type of hybrid with, some members of each of those groups, it'd be working with each of those sets of stakeholders to identify their representative that they wanted at the table and figuring out how to structure that so that we were all clear and aligned about who that would be. But ultimately, it's a lot about just drawing on those relationships that have been cultivated over my time in this role, and asking folks for other names and numbers as well and encouraging them to activate their networks.
Thank you. So I do agree with Council Member Julie and Byrd that we might need to kind of look at lengthening the time of our meeting to take inputs and really have a dialogue with the stakeholders. And I do believe that you have most of the stakeholders listed, but I think what is missing is the resident stakeholders, especially in our business core, university as well as California Avenue, because they both have issues with parking that can become a problem, and they actually have a lot of parking knowledge. They have looked at, kept track of what the garages are doing and so forth, pre-COVID and also post-COVID. So it's a good idea to kind of involve them in that. And the staff report also says that, the formatting of the meeting in November, the study session, is not have everybody chime in whenever. So I think that we do want to, so between you and I, we might want to look at what is a viable way of doing it, that would be still inclusive if we're not having people chime in at all times. So that's another thing that we might want to discuss. We have a lot of topics on this. Let me see here. I did want to mention that we are looking at just downtown and Cal Ave, which are two business districts that are very much with individual owners, so very many different owners, not similar to Stanford as well as Town and Country. The other business district that we don't want to forget is Midtown. So Midtown is another area that has many different property owners. So we want to kind of learn from, kind of bring that into our discussion as well, so that we make sure that they continue to be successful. And I just want to make sure that, so Steve, do you have a list compiled of the commercial property owners for Midtown, Downtown, and California Avenue?
I have a list for Downtown University Avenue and some for California Avenue. We have much less insight into the owners and connections to Midtown. I think one of the points to keep in mind to address your concerns, Chair Koo, is not only the conversations about the range and depth of discussion that we want, but also recognizing that as we talk through these things, as we talk about accelerating through city processes, as we talk about what retail uses and retail-like uses are allowed where, as we talk about, opportunities to help install art or other ways to activate vacant storefronts, those are not just for those two areas. Those could be applying citywide, and that's another way to factor in Midtown and other shopping centers as well.
Okay, thank you, because, we have to look at shopping centers throughout the town, but then also recognize that, the ownership of it too, and how is it managed, because it's very, very different when you have so many different managements, different property owners. Um, and then to get back to the list of property owners and to engage with and to have them on our list so that they get notification. Perhaps the real estate office, the city's real estate office can assist with that using county records or perhaps even title companies to get together the list for these property owners in the business districts so that they're included in the discussion. And also, I wanted to ask staff if, when they're talking to stakeholders, is our 9 o'clock time for our meeting a good time for them? Because obviously, they're getting ready for the business to open or whatnot. And so, do we make it earlier, or is 9 o'clock a good time? And, just to be more inclusive.
mean, Just one thought there, Chair. Much earlier than 9, I think, is difficult. I think 9 is generally all right. I think the biggest piece is the marketing and outreach on it and just socializing that we'll be meeting from 9 to noon. The other virtue of the study session format is, especially if we're able to narrow down on topics and say, if there's 3, for example, recognizing the committee's interest in addressing all of these topics. But if it's 3, kind of giving that order for folks, and then they can choose to join in generally as they see fit for those topics. There might be some folks who really want to engage on one of the potential areas for discussion, but less so on another. And so just giving that idea and framework is helpful there. Also receptive to the idea voiced of the need for sustained engagement on this, and we're probably not going to get it completely solved in one meeting. And so that's another opportunity to include in the marketing and outreach as well.
Thank you. Okay, that's good. I think we always have to be reminded that, with the downtown California Avenue as well as Midtown, the location that they're situated and the clientele that they're looking at is going to be very different. So I think that needs to be identified as well. Narrowing it down to the November meeting for what topics we're going to decide, what we're going to be talking about is also important, because I don't think we're going to get to everything. You have entitlement and development process, uncertainty of plans and parking, trends in brick and mortar, retail, potential vacancy tax, and business improvement districts. That's a lot to unpack in one meeting, especially hearing from stakeholders. So I agree that we might need more than one meeting, which is probably 2 or 3. But we could also put it into buckets of immediate, midterm, and long-term. And also look at some things that is like the deciding factors in order to bring in more businesses. So I'll leave it at that. I don't see a timer, so I'll leave it at that. And maybe we'll have another go around to delve into each of the buckets here that was listed in the staff report.
Yeah, Julie,
Yeah.
you have another cut at this?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I wanted to second some of Pat's suggestions. Your notion that it might take 2 meetings to adequately air opinions and then reach some kind of consensus, I agree with. Just looking at the calendar, November 20th is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So we're going to come upon that kind of holiday mashup of unavailability. And for that reason, I might suggest going long on the 20th, going past noon, having a morning where we discuss, having an afternoon where we reach consensus. That may be wildly unpopular, but okay. Okay. Wildly unpopular. You think it's unpopular? You think it's a good idea? Well, that's what I'm thinking. I'm just feeling like there's such coalescence, and I would hate to discover that we can't have meeting number 2 until January because of the unavailability of most people in December following Thanksgiving. So let us just structure this in a way that is determined, to reach a successful cooperative outcome. And I would certainly be delighted to devote an entire day to this. And so I wanted to just put that out there. Are you going to respond to that? I see you having feelings.
So I just want to react a little bit. Appreciate for those who may be watching online that there's some reactions from the audience behind me that I just wanted to characterize as, a desire to engage on this topic. This really is meant to be a study session of an ad hoc Brown Acted committee of the City Council to talk about this. I don't think we're going to solve it. And I want to be managing expectations a little bit. I appreciate the framing of let's, get these inputs and then work towards hearing people's perspectives and then work towards consensus. I think that's the right framing. I just want to be mindful too that we're not going to be able to solve it no matter how long we devote to it in a single day. And really, this is going to shape ongoing work for economic development and future efforts.
I appreciate that. And I apologize for using the term solve, reaching consensus and what had been discussed earlier in the day. There you go. Move toward consensus. But look, I don't want to underutilize this very carefully crafted opportunity of a study session. I want everyone to come out of it going, my God, thank goodness we did that. Because it will generate its own momentum, deepen partnerships, and accelerate what happens next. In addition, I want to agree with Pat on his concern. It is a little off topic for this agenda, but he mentioned that the zoning changes should not be on consent for council. And I agree with that because too many people will want to pull it for the sake of conversation. It'll just kick it down the road. So why don't we anticipate that and put it on action? Again, in the spirit of moving things along more quickly, which I completely agree with. The last thing that I guess I'm going to wait to see what Pat has to say on, in his next round, because I have a feeling you're going to start helping us shape what you think the topic should be. I have my own thoughts about what maybe can be pulled out, what doesn't necessarily fit in this effort, one of which is the entitlement planning and development, simply because it's already underway with the work of the PTC. And we've heard it, now it's going to council 2 days before this study session. So it might be weird to sort of have council discuss, assuming it comes off consent, and then we sort of bring it back. I feel like that train has already left the station. I also know that vacancy tax being a more negative, a stick rather than a carrot might really dampen the mood of the study session. And if we really are trying to bring a spirit of collaboration, cooperation, while I think it's an important topic for us to learn more about, because some municipalities have resorted to that, I think I would be willing to move that to a different date, not in the too distant future. So that we really maintain an aura of positivity and cooperation and possibility during the study session.
Sorry, Jeff. Okay.
All right, my language is getting questioned
All
left
right.
right here. Not a solution, not an aura.
All right. So first on kind of this, both related to the zoning changes being on consent and more broadly, we often just will say, well, we don't have time to do that and we'll rush this forward. And then we really haven't worked through the process. Like, I'm really appreciative that we're having this discussion today to think thoroughly as we can about the process in advance versus just diving in. And it reminds me the adage of why is it that we never have enough time to do it right at the outset, but always have enough time to do it over. And that I see that so frequently, and we'll feel the pressure of getting something through. Either we'll take too long, or the pressure of getting it through too quickly, and we don't invest in trying to really do it right and really move the ball forward. And do it expeditiously. And this is, people, I think, kind of have a false dichotomy that if you do it right, it's just going to take too long, especially in this town. And that can be the case. And that's why we need to think through the process thoroughly in advance, and then review the process as we're wading into it to see, okay, what adjustments might we need to make? Our preconceptions might have been wrong. I also hadn't seen really a breakdown of that one of the things that we are going to need to look at is what are near-term, medium-term, and long-term measures. And I think that we need to frame, not limit the discussion initially to only a certain subsets of those, but be very conscious and try to break them down as we're discussing them. Go into it recognizing that we will have those three buckets. And then as we go through the process, further figure out which things we're putting into each bucket. We may have preconceptions, but then that's something that we want to ask ourselves as we go through that. And as folks were bringing up the dilemma really of we got a November 20th meeting, and then we're going to be going into the holiday period. And it makes me wonder whether the second meeting should be November 20th and the first one perhaps November 13th. And that would enable us to have two successive meetings a week apart and get them through that before the holiday break.
One off the cuff reaction here is, as Councilmember Lithcott-Hames was alluding to, the efforts to mobilize and engage and frankly scale this conversation are not lightweight. And so the efforts to do that once and have it all happen on one day really does resonate a little bit, because you have to organize everyone, you have to get them bought into that day, that time commitment and all of that. Moving it up a week truncates the outreach period for it, truncates the opportunity to engage there. Again, not saying it can't be done, certainly happy to have that discussion with the committee. And if that's the direction of the committee, we'll do all in our power to pursue that. Just noting that the efforts to.
So acknowledging that, let's talk about the alternative though. If we have a meeting on November 20th, we're either talking about trying to go from framing the issues and understanding points of view to moving toward consensus in a single session, or having a meeting in early December that would be a follow-up right after Thanksgiving. And does that really work? So an option, if we're talking Wednesdays, call it hypothetically December 4th. That might be a second option. So I don't know, maybe let people think about that for a moment.
Sure. And I do think, sorry, I don't know, I've spoken today. Kylie is the Assistant City Manager. I do think this kind of noodling on how we choreograph this conversation is a productive use of our time. I also don't think we have to solve the dates today. We can kind of identify goals or kind of preferences, and then let staff go through in terms of coordinating with folks on what works. We've done this with budget before. We'll do kind of tentative holds on folks' calendars so that if we need a day 2 or a day 3, that, people know that this is bookmarked for that, so we can modify the conversation real time to accommodate whatever the dialogue is that's necessary. I'll just note, folks get tired for a full day. On one hand, I'm right there with Steve and the stakeholders and feel in general, it's nice to knock it out in one day. On the other, I'll just note these are tough topics. And so just want to acknowledge that the stakeholders may not be able to engage for the full day and to just folks' capacity.
I'll add a third element, which is in addition to the two that you mentioned, is that there's really a need to digest materials and reflect on them and maybe confer with colleagues. If somebody's a stakeholder, they may need to kind of seek authority to take a position on behalf of their stakeholder group, depending on the formality. So I think there are a number of reasons to not try to do it in one day, as appealing as that might be. And then I had another topic that was related to things that Lydia raised. And that is, which of these and to what degree do these different topics apply to University, CalAv, and Midtown, which I think are the three areas. And that we haven't framed that yet. Maybe that's a matrix that we do that just attempts to identify which might apply to each. So that if we go in this first day, it's our biggest downtown is University, and a lot of this is kind of comes to mind as university focused, but not university exclusively. So I haven't really thought through that, but if you think about even our stakeholders, we have a different group of stakeholders and even to some degree points of view, say on CalAv or Midtown, than we do for University and downtown. And I'm not that. I haven't thought through how we would manage that. I worry that this stakeholder group at the table gets so large that we can't have real dialogue. And yet, if we have all the stakeholders to be University, are we deciding on behalf of CalAv, tentatively deciding without them really having that voice and dialogue? So then, if it's okay, I'll go through just a few of the topic areas. One that I didn't see is related to ultimately marketing. What are the identities of each of these three retail areas? And that goes into who are the clients who spend money at them. And that even in some ways informs just all of the decision making. We heard Steve Levy talk about, as a downtown resident, what services he uses. I'm very interested in hearing any analysis that we can get from the business community, from a range of retail and service businesses, where their revenue comes from historically and today, and then we can think about going forward. Because historically, we've had a high portion, overwhelmingly in the downtowns, both downtowns, as being from workers, non-resident workers, and non-resident visitors. Midtown has been historically resident-oriented. Today, we have both University and CalAv that are more resident and visitor oriented, particularly more resident than they were pre-COVID, but I don't know how much more. And that doesn't mean that our future, as we begin to see a recovery in workers in downtown, and if depending on what changes and investments we do, what our potential client base is versus what it is at this point in time, which is somewhere in between where we used to be, the craziness under acute COVID, and where we're going to be. We're in that transition to a new normal. And one of the things to bear in mind is that we tend to say, oh, well, we're in this new hybrid work era, and that's what we're facing. But we actually are also facing a tech downturn at the same time. And that will begin to recover in somewhat of a similar time frame to as the employers make adjustments to their longer term kind of in-office work model. And my guess is over the next 2 to 5 years, we'll get back toward a new normal, which will look closer to the old normal, but not the same. And trying to anticipate what that would be is going to be imprecise and yet still important to attempt to do. Steve, did you want to add on something?
Yeah, I wanted to chime in just ever so briefly, recognizing that that was not named explicitly and perhaps not called out as clearly as it could have been. When we talk about trends in brick and mortar retail, we're also talking about retail demand within that. And to your point, trying to figure out where the puck is going and trying to get there in terms of what we've got in terms of options for retail is critical. And that's where a conversation with brokers is very helpful and very informative, because they can report not only what they're seeing here in Palo Alto, but what they're seeing in other similar communities as well.
Yeah, and so that's one important dimension, which is more broadly, what are trends? And then the second one is more specifically to these retail areas, what are those identities that are not generic? Okay. I do want to note John Schenk's concern on that food and beverage retailers who are moving forward on parklets may not be aware of the rules and may be investing based on incorrect assumptions. And I think we need to get on that right away. Part of that is a resource base. So first, I don't know what we have in terms of really clear, simple guidelines and sets of rules that have been distributed to each and every one of these retailers. I'd like to see that. I don't think we've seen it as a retail committee. And then how do we get it out to them, make sure they all have it? And then how do we have enforcement going forward, not only of the construction, but the operation? And it strikes me that we've increased our code enforcement staff with a focus on leaf blowers and otherwise, but this is an aspect of code enforcement. Like with leaf blowers and other things, we don't want to lead with being punitive. We want to get compliance, and so we want to make sure that if we bring in code enforcement, they're not heavy-handed. That we're trying to be collaborative, but in the end, we have to have compliance. So I think that's something that we need to. We don't have to have a big discussion on it at the retreat, but I think we want to know how staff is addressing those two things. Yeah.
Councilmember Burt, I will say staff does have robust documentation on parklets, and since the transition this past summer has been working on pretty extensive proactive and hand-holding support as we implement the ongoing, thank you for the right word, the ongoing standards. And to the extent there's non-compliance or there are folks that are seeking things that are out of compliance, really working with them. So I do believe that staff is trying to be proactive and frankly, pretty diligent in working through
we have an
those.
apparent disconnect between at least some perceptions and what you just said. And so let's address the disconnect. So I don't dispute what you've said.
Fair.
And yet we have a disconnect.
And we have Holly Boyd, who's joining us, Assistant Director for Public Works, who can speak more to the parklets. I think to the disconnect piece, the outreach and engagement has largely been focused on parklet operators and prospective parklet operators who have expressed their interest in having one. So we've really targeted there to get that outreach and engagement going. And I'll happily turn it over to Holly for more context there.
Okay, I don't want to go into depth at this time, but I'd welcome a brief update, and then I think the follow-up should be to try to understand the disconnect.
Okay. Good morning, council members. My name is Holly Boyd. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Works. So yes, we hired a part-time person 6 months ago who is just working on parklets. So he is out there 3 to 4 days a week, on site, meeting with the parklet operators, reviewing their applications, making sure they're building it correctly. And that's been a big help. As we approach the November 1st deadline for the ongoing parklet guidelines to become effective, will move towards an enforcement approach. And I believe you guys were updated last week based on the ongoing parklet program applications. We've approved, I think, 8 to date. And there's 14, I believe, still in the works. But yes, I will look into finding that disconnect. We have, as Steve said, we have been focusing on the parklet operators and not the neighbors or any user aspect of that.
Great. Let me just hit a couple other things. One is related, we have the updates to our zoning code that are in the midst, which I think are going to be very positive in terms of not requiring conditional use permits in as many circumstances and other related matters. We hear a refrain that is both reality-based and perception-based, and the reality and the perception are not necessarily the same. But that Palo Alto remains a tough place for a retailer to come in and get permitted and do business. So I've been very interested in having a clear plan laid out of what we've done, where we are today, and what we have on the horizon to address those problems. And I think we can go through and do all of this. And unless we address both that reality and that perception, we're going to have real headwinds to accomplishing it. We could put a lot of money in downtown and have limited success if people think they don't want to come here to do business.
Yeah, and hearing that again, I think that fits under the permitting process. We're happy to pull that together if that's an area of discussion that the retail committee wants to dive into.
And I think it's not just the discussion. I think this is something that we have to formulate and present to the public, to the policymakers, and then to our audience of brokers and prospective businesses. And part of that would be to show what we've already done, which in doing so acknowledges past problems we had. We don't acknowledge it and we continue to say, oh, no, that was never the case. Our credibility is not there. And we have a tendency to insist that the perception was never real. And I think that I hear so many anecdotes that are disconnected from what I hear from our staff in terms of their own sincere belief in terms of how hard it is versus what the customer perception is. There is another disconnect, and it remains a pretty big one. And unless we are forthright in addressing that, we're going to have a big problem that'll just stay. So let me move forward on just a couple other things. One is how this upcoming meeting will be facilitated. And I'm really wondering whether we should bring in someone to facilitate this conversation. Somebody that comes to mind is Good City and Aaron Hacknen, who knows our community well and would be, I think, pretty impartial and has a lot of real retail expertise and planning expertise. And unlike some of the consultants we've had, actually understands Palo Alto. So I'd suggest that. And I think we haven't talked about the downtown housing committee, and that's more medium and longer term, but that and what's happening with transit and specifically the University Avenue train station and its potential are factors. They're not the near term. Well, the train station is actually got some near and medium term real benefits to the downtown, I think. There's some things on the horizon. And then just a couple, a comment on the relationship. There are two questions on vacant storefronts and vacancy tax. And I do think those things are potentially related. I haven't been someone who wanted to leap at a vacancy tax, but we can't have storefronts that are dead for years. I'll just say that a couple of the kind of conditions that I've had to being willing to look at, not necessarily a tax, but perhaps a fine for dead space. And that means that if you activate the space, even if you don't have a retailer, maybe that's a way that someone wouldn't receive a fine. It wouldn't be too immediate because it can take a long time to bring in a new tenant, even as if a landlord is really wanting to do that. And I'd be interested in any use of funds from those fees going right back into that district, not to general fund, so they benefit the very thing we're trying to do. And separately to look at really long-term vacancies and what's happening and how do we have any enforcement mechanisms. One is the Hotel California that has been ground floor vacant for 6 years. There was remodeling issues, but it just seems like it's completely stalled out, and a major portion of Cal Ave vacancies are related to that. So that covers my points. Thanks for bearing with me. Lydia?
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of things a lot of the questions that you have are really good. And it might double up in some of the things I say going forward. So I put it into buckets as staff has put it for the entitlement and development process. You know, on parklets, right? The parklets operators, obviously, you know, a lot of it has to do with them. So a lot of it is already that they got more space and they're no longer confined to the interior footprint of their space, right? Of their lease space or owned space, interior. So the city needs to take that into consideration as it's, you know, in terms of the interference with visibility for other businesses, and make sure that we are not favoring one over the other. I want to see, as we're doing the entitlement and development process, that we're exploring things like food court ideas, explore formula retail on University, Hamilton, and Lytton. We have something for restaurants right now, but I think retail is another thing to explore, and how much formula retail to have there. These are mostly anchor stores, so we want to make sure that we have some of those. And then to an extent, ground floor retail preservation is still needed in order to protect some of the streets, such as University Avenue itself, which is a high traffic area, right? And then I think that's also important for us as we're going into this to identify street by street in the downtown core, California Avenue core, what are possible retail based on the need for foot traffic, drive-by visibility, retail shops that for foot traffic as we're walking by, we just want to stop in at a whim. You know, I think some of the retail that is that I can mention is like when people walk by Letter Perfect, you know, it's like, oh, what is this? And then they stop in and look at it, you know. Or formerly we had Shady Lane, which was another great retail shop with a lot of knickknacks and wonderfully crafted stuff. And I remember I would stop in after lunch or before lunch as we're walking by it, you know. Consignment shops, how do we attract more of those consignment shops? Previously we had footwear, and you know, these are shopping and retail that people walk by and may want to stop in just because, you know, they have time, and it's one of those on the whim stop-ins. Then I think we need to identify what are destination businesses, medical services, cosmetic facelift, oxygen breathing, etc., does not need to be in the high traffic streets. One does not walk by one of these establishments and say, oh, let me stop in and get a facelift or breathe some oxygen or have a medical procedure, So perhaps if they want to be on the main street, like University, maybe there should be on the second floor, or maybe they should be on the immediate side streets. I think those are distinctions that I think we need to kind of identify also. Some of our side streets that's intersecting with using University Avenue as well as California Avenue's retail. Identify some of those side streets that are highly that are more used for some of these businesses. So I think that going forward, as a city ourselves, we need to identify that with the help of stakeholders, but city itself needs to determine that as well. I think it's going to be a little bit more harder on California Ave just because, it's a closed street, but let's identify what are the barriers there. It's a closed street. What are the barriers, right? Also, with in the staff report, it mentions things like Third Thursday, which is an activity, and promotions more successfully on some of the managed properties like Town and Country as well as Stanford Mall. They're all managed by a management company and under one ownership. So they can come up with activities and promotions. I think we need to identify what kind of promotions is needed. But I think property owners as well as business owners need to have a stake in it as well. It cannot be completely funded and operated, coordinated by the city. They need to have some ownership in this as well in order to activate and do the better good for the entire business district. So they need to have ownership in there. Furthermore, I think in Midtown, because it's more serving the neighborhood and residences, I kind of wonder, is there zoning that restricts having an arcade or a bowling alley go in there? And what is needed in order to accommodate or open it for accommodate something like that? Going to uncertainty of plans and parking. Again, we need to be clear about the immediate, midterm, and long-term plans. So really develop that so that stakeholders understand that and willing to contribute and have ownership. Then I want to say, I think I mentioned that before, that downtown residents have already been tracking parking trends in downtown. Include them in the discussion. Evergreen Park residents also have been tracking parking trends. Include them in that discussion as well. And then I think we need to really go through what are the definition of retail-like uses, so that people understand that retail-like services, etc. What are they? I think the definition needs to be a lot more defined. Trends in brick and mortar retail. I think we still need to preserve ground floor retail, and we still need the restrictions there. But we need to be also reminded of the dot-com times when retail businesses were leaving because their landlord raised their rents, which made them leave the town, and they relocated completely outside of Palo Alto. And one, that's revenue that's going to other towns and not to Palo Alto. So at the end of the day, our revenues went down. Two, property owners realized that office space rents are more lucrative than retail. So we need to learn from the past on this. Property owners will always want to maximize on their ROIs, but the city must have planning and uses defined for what is best for the city. That is determining where is destination retail, what is destination retail like, and services. So let's be reminded people still group their errand runs together. So when they come into go to the bank or whatnot, they have it grouped. So from the bank to the post office to walking by a shop and saying, oh, let me stop in there and do some shopping, and then go to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's, to get some groceries. But they park their car, and within the 2-hour parking limit or the 3-hour, they go to many different places. So let's be reminded of that. And let's not forget that we have ADA. So people that have mobility issues or are disabled, that they need to get into where they need to go also. Potential vacancy tax. I remember bringing this up long before, both for ground for retail and residential. I believe this is a topic to explore. Staff can review what other cities with a vacancy tax have done and what are its pros and cons. I've brought up that the city of San Francisco, before I've brought up that the city of San Francisco, they have one, they put that together, but I think, if I remember correctly, they put that together before COVID pandemic. So I don't know how successful it is, therefore we need to examine it a little bit more, but look at different cities that has pros and cons. What are they? Interim activations of vacant storefronts. Some of these storefronts have potentials of having treatments, temporary art or window treatments, but I think that maybe with relevancy to the zoning use might be helpful. And then with encouragement wording such as, and this can be your business, contact us for more information. But I've seen retail districts where a vacant storefront would have decorations or treatments that would highlight that particular potential zoning or use for that space, and try to attract businesses using that. So that would be one idea that might be considered. Business improvement district, I really think that we need to have that, because businesses need to have ownership of where they're located and must come together to activate the location through events and promotion. It's a partnership of businesses and property owners, and I really believe that the city itself needs to start funding and organizing these activities and promotions. And until we kind of the city stops doing that, as a small business owner, I would say, why should I contribute to that if the city is willing to do that? I've just shifted the burden to the city as a business owner. I also think the city itself should be supportive of communication, such as the kind that Napa does in terms of their promoting what is happening that weekend or that week in their city, what activities there are. The kind that Napa does is really great. I don't know if I signed on to Napa, but I can't believe I would have subscribed to Napa for that, because it's pretty far, and I don't know why I would want more emails coming to me, but somehow I'm getting Napa's emails. Perhaps I'm included because of the Chamber of Commerce or because I'm a council member, but maybe the city's communication office can provide more suggestions on that. But going into the November, I would welcome 2 meetings in November, just so that we can go kind of identify today, what are some of the areas that we want for each of the meetings, so that we can have more dialogue and more participation from merchants. I would suggest looking at immediate and midterm, and then identify what are some of the long-term items that we want to address so that we can get these business districts going and more activities there and more revenues for the owners and so forth. Thank you.
Chair, could I just have a couple more minutes?
Of course.
Thank you. This has been such a terrific conversation. I'm finding myself just for the sake of staff understanding where there might be consensus among council members, just wanted to circle back to a couple of points my colleagues have made. First of all, I really appreciate Pat's idea about November 13th and 20th as a pair, or November 20th and December 4th. I think either is fine. Let's let staff decide based on what they know of the availability of our stakeholders, whether they're 1 week apart or 2 weeks apart. I think is less important than these dates really work and are going to facilitate our success with the overall purpose of it. Second, I liked his idea that we should bring in someone to facilitate. I know, Steve, you put in the staff report that maybe you would be the facilitator, and I want to offer that the facilitator is meant to be sort of neutral, impartial. You are engaged. You have ownership of this concept of economic revitalization, and I think it empowers you to bring in somebody else from the outside. It sounds like we have somebody great in mind from Good City. And so I second that notion that an outside facilitator will really, frankly, allow you to play the role you ought to be playing. I think you'll be have a hard time participating fully as facilitator. Pat's point about perception versus reality is very much on point, and I'm heartened that in the next agenda item, we are told that at least some brokers reported having better experiences due to the efforts of staff over the past year working on zoning and permitting, which is great. The more people talk about their positive experiences with staff, the more people will begin to, change their minds. And this study session is a further opportunity to, for us to demonstrate to our stakeholders that things are changing. But I want to put a pin in the point that it is important for us to try to track that and pay attention to that, because how we speak to all of this will impact people's perceptions. I also like the idea that how we do things more quickly in and of itself should be a topic area. I think our partners are in the business world probably have ideas for us about how to help our city be more nimble when it comes to addressing these issues. I also agree with the idea of a vacancy fee rather than a tax. Fee for dead stores is how I heard it, a fee that would go back to the business district where that store happens to be. Again, not sure it needs to be in this conversation that we're trying to jam so many topics into, but I hope it'll happen soon, if not during the study session. And then the notion of really different stakeholder viewpoints on CalAv and Midtown versus University. I wanted to second that and make sure that as we're planning this, we don't let University be the sort of big, the gorilla in the room that prevents the smaller districts from being sort of properly discussed. And that's it for me. Thank you.
That's a lot.
I was going to say, so I might I'll just say committee at large, since we've got Councilmember Burt helping us here, as well as Chair Koo. I think it would be helpful for staff if we tried to perhaps feed back to you at a high level what we've heard for the structure of the study session coming up, as there have been a lot of ideas, but ultimately we'll have to organize, choreograph, and knock this out in terms of setting expectations moving forward. So at the pleasure of the committee, can we take a stab at that? Awesome. Okay, so what I've heard is at least a two-part conversation. Staff will work on dates and times, probably about 3.5 hours is my guess, per session. I'm a facilitator for that. I think Steve would agree and staff would agree, just in general, allowing folks to have play their roles with clarity will be helpful. The other aspect that I heard are a lot of areas for discussion. So one thing I might suggest is and I'll look to Steve to kind of help on this, but perhaps focus ourselves to kind of like 3 hot topics that we want to initially take off. Now, doesn't have to be a narrow topic, but just at least 3 subject areas so that we can both appropriately engage the stakeholders as well as the community and agenda purposes. And just acknowledging time, right? We're almost at 2 hours here in terms of how we plan this, let alone navigating the conversation when we get there. I heard the committee loud and clear that they don't want to feel time bound in this discussion. So I think just setting those expectations up front on how far we can get topic wise will be an important aspect of this. And the last piece, and I'm not quite sure how to handle this, but I do think is important in terms of scoping what districts or areas we're talking about. And I really, I know it may feel narrowing, but I do think we probably need to limit that or focus it for this initial set. It doesn't mean we can't come back and have future discussions or dialogues on different areas, but the breadth and of both the stakeholders as well as the viewpoints and the different characteristics, I think we'll find a little it'll die under its own weight in one conversation.
Can I just wait in? I think you're right. That's kind of my gut. I hate to defer the others, but if we, at the same time, are looking at, even if the focus is university, we look at which of these things apply to the others.
Absolutely.
We make progress on the others without,
Exactly.
well, yeah.
Yep, 100%. So I think we're on that exact same wavelength. It allows us to continue progress. And obviously, if we tackle, say, university or Cal Ave, those are going to be the bigger, more difficult areas. And so hopefully we can take those learnings to make the future discussions more efficient. So with that, I might turn it to Steve and then with the committee to kind of think about what are those perhaps 3 areas for us to find focus on.
So there's a lot of very good feedback from the committee. So this is my attempt at taking a crack and trying to roll it all up again for discussion and engagement as we go forward. So I think one area that has emerged loud and clear is the idea of the permitting, the process, and using that as an opportunity for marketing a bit and remind people of the work we've already got underway in terms of the zoning changes that we're proposing to council, also able to address what we've done, where we're headed in the horizon, but also giving people a chance to voice their perspective on what they view as current conditions, what they view as barriers, and what they view as those areas to improve. I think giving that space to address those reputational concerns to a broader audience helps serve as the notice that we are taking these concerns seriously. It addresses the accountability piece and it addresses our interest in continuing to move quickly. That's also an opportunity for people to weigh in on how to accelerate. And that kind of framing of current conditions, barriers, areas to improve, and how to accelerate, I think is a useful frame, regardless of topic area, for us to consider as we go forward. Another thing that emerged a bit under some of this was retail demand, marketing, partnership, and district, kind of all together. I think they're really tied together. And so I think there's an opportunity there to talk with brokers, hear what they're seeing in retail demand, talk with brokers about, opportunities for marketing, and talk with property owners, brokers, and retailers about the opportunities to partnership and that idea of district identity. Not only what do we see in terms of customers, but how do you view yourselves internally? What would a successful marketing effort look like? And Chair Koo, you mentioned those emails you get from Napa. Those are from downtown Napa's bid. That's not the city of Napa sending those. That's their downtown business group. And they're all chipping in money. They're all doing that marketing together. And that's how these commercial districts owned by multiple property owners are able to compete with places like Town and Country that does extensive marketing, places like Stanford Shopping Center that frankly has their own marketing budget. So those were 2 top.
That's very good to know. And that's why, bids, these districts are really important. These business improvement districts are so important that we need to kind of reestablish that. And I think businesses need to reestablish that. It's for their own benefit.
Yes. And then I think just, with the idea of trying to narrow and trying to get to a third topic, trying to harness the positive, constructive engagement that we've got, I do think there's an opportunity to talk about what tools the city can help provide in terms of those activations of vacant storefronts. Councilmember Lithcott-Hames heard you loud and clear at the outset of this conversation, which was a bit ago, but I want to make sure, that idea of pop-ups. Yeah. And just the overall sense of, trying to activate these spaces. And that is a range. And I do want to also acknowledge that there's different resources necessary for each of those. Standing up a program that partners with pop-ups and helps cite those is order of magnitude more work than a near-term thing, which could be public arts able to help provide some assets and resources and connections to brokers and property owners who might want to enliven the space a little bit without reaching that full activation. And so if we're talking about narrowing, if we're talking about how not to boil the ocean in one fell swoop, but really get this conversation going and reaching this constructive participation, I think that frame of areas for improvement, current conditions, ways to accelerate applied to each of those three areas, and maybe narrowing to say University Avenue for the first one could be a good way to keep this conversation going. Happy to hear feedback on if those areas kind of generally capture areas of great interest to the committee, or if we want to.
Well, just following up on your last point, I think an additional reason for looking at near term and then medium term is building on success and gaining enthusiasm because we show real progress.
And council members, I think, embedded in the topics that Steve just identified, there are going to be immediate, mid, and long-term components. So I did fail to include that, but I think we've heard that piece loud and clear, that within these more narrow topic areas, we will need to kind of talk through and be able to have a constructive dialogue around implementation timeframes and those kinds of things.
I just want to offer, I appreciate the distinction between the ways in which the vacant storefronts can be addressed through art versus pop-up. I want us to not presume that the pop-up is orders of magnitude. The city of San Jose has a ADU czar that has ADU Tuesdays. You come into the front hall of the city hall and you meet with the ADU czar. You don't need an appointment. They got some pre-planned stuff. And I'm picturing right here in one of these windows, you got a micro business, you're looking to start up in Palo Alto, which is the history of our city. We've got a list of property owners interested in filling vacancies with micro. Come tell us what your business idea is. We'll put you in touch with some of these property owners that are potentially interested. I think that would create a dynamism and an energy signal that we're supporting weird, random new things that are, could be the start of something amazing. So I want us to not squelch that idea without thinking a little bit more outside the box about it first.
And one other thing that I didn't mention related to the marketing is that downtown Palo Alto and its surroundings, Stanford and Palo Alto, have international renown, and we have minuscule marketing based upon that renown. You go elsewhere and, if we have, I mentioned this before, I get asked now every time we get visiting delegations to do Pat's little walkabout in greater downtown area and SOFA area. And folks are in awe of what actually is here and amazed that there's no placard, there's no app. They go, how can you have this much that has happened here and there's nothing? And this also goes to the role, we didn't talk about the role of the chamber in this. In most circumstances, the chamber would have had for a long time a stronger leading role in this. And they need to be part of that stakeholder group and have a discussion on what's the appropriate role there, what's the appropriate role of the city and others, and how do we collaborate on this? Okay, thanks.
I just want to make sure that we keep in mind that that there is another stakeholder, which are the people who live here, and what is the greater benefit for all of them. Understanding that property owners as well as businesses, they are looking for a their return on investment, right? But what are the benefits to the residents over here? So let's not forget that. and be inclusive of them when we're determining all of this. So I think this topic was, this agenda item was a discussion. I don't know if staff needs any more.
Shaking their heads vehemently no.
Thank you for that. I can't see, but there's no motion or anything for this, but if that's all, then we can conclude this item. Pat?
Yep. Okay. So we have just a few minutes to talk about item number 2, which is the Economic Development Activity Report for October.
So we're not going to actually run into the PowerPoint for this. We don't need to. I think the big thing to just keep in mind is that this report is presented to the Retail Committee to give an update on the work of economic development staff and its partners throughout the organization in terms of what we have going on. We're trying to scale as we can. We included the Q3 updates for the 2024 objectives under the City Council priority of economic development and transition. So you've got those updates there giving you a list of what's happening. We've included a list of certificates of use and occupancy that are coming online just so folks can see which retail uses are coming into town soon, and generally where they're located. We've got some exciting stuff happening downtown on University Avenue, some longstanding vacancies that are getting filled. And for anybody who read the Silicon Valley Business Journal or other periodicals, there's a new owner of 321 California Avenue, the former Antonio's Nut House. So just trying to track and make sure Retail Committee is aware of all that good work that economic development staff and partners throughout the city are doing. We have had conversations with brokers and property owners. We partnered with Good City Company to actually have those conversations with brokers. As Councilmember Lithcott-Hames alluded to, there was some comments on the reputational concerns, but they've noted things have gotten better. They are seeing a greater demand for retail-like uses in commercial cores. And frankly, they affirmed the work that is already underway from this committee in terms of zoning changes, in terms of looking at ways to accelerate things and try to address those issues. The final piece I just wanted to note is, there's a lot of internal and external coordination happening. We continue to meet with CalAv merchants on a monthly basis. Council approved $40,000 for Third Thursday to help keep that activation going. We'll continue to try and partner for greater connections with the business community there. And if there's any highlights that Retail Committee wants to discuss further, happy to do so.
Thank you. Do we have any members of the public who want to speak on this item?
There are no requests to speak.
Okay. Julie?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. It does feel like there is a lot of momentum to this engine, which is exciting, and I commend you for it and your whole team. I always ask myself in these meetings why it is that our staff focused on these critical efforts is so small in a city with over 1,000 staff. When you just look at the chart of our progress completed on target behind, there are, I think, 4 names in addition to Jonathan Late on this chart. And some of them are in other departments. And so with mid-year budget review coming, I wonder if we ought to be asking for additional staff for you as part of this effort to continue the momentum, to accelerate to the point of things happening more urgently, and you all not being so stretched thin you can't breathe. Is that something that you would be in favor of? It's a very softball question.
It is.
We have to ask it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Councilmember Lithcott-Hames. And ultimately, listening to the discussion today and past retail committees, I think the appetite for investment and engagement in this area is pretty insatiable. And so resources and scaling is important. I will say, I think what will be important in adding resources is being clear on what outcomes we want from it. And so I don't want to say that staff wouldn't be in favor of necessarily adding resources at mid-year. I think it's simply a matter of making sure that we are aligning the resources with expectations and creating, whether it's staff, consultants or not, whatnot, creating an environment for them to be successful, whatever or whoever it may be. I hearken back to when we added the initial A2CM in this role where the council made a decision on kind of the scope and orders of magnitude in which they wanted to make an investment in economic development. And we continue to push the limits of what that investment was going to be. So I really do appreciate the question. And I think we just want to be thoughtful in what resources, what outcomes come with it. And I do think actually these upcoming conversations will help inform that.
Thanks. And given the time and the fact that this is a quarterly update and things we're sort of constantly discussing, I'm not going to ask any further questions. Thanks.
Just a few things. One is in going through the attachment A to this report, which is all the different areas that are in progress or completed. There are a number that are behind, but they don't have any update on intended completion date. So it just says we're behind. And as a rule, and I brought this up previously, I think we need to make sure that we are as concrete as possible. And I'd like to get this attachment updated and sent to us that really shows us, okay, we understand we're behind. How much behind, and when do we now think we're going to get what done? And then sorry.
Council member, I believe at a high level, it's in there. For those that are behind schedule, there's a asterisk. So like estimated completion on item 2 was Q2. The asterisk is unfortunately on the next page, but it says the revised completion date is now Q4.
I didn't catch that asterisk.
It is a nuance to the page break. We will work to make sure that
Yes.
this asterisk
Got it.
right along.
All right,
but
well, thank you, and sorry that I missed that.
not at all. And staff did try to include that information, recognizing the interest in accountability.
Got it. Thank you. And then one of the things on the parklets, let's see, that's number 6, right? Pre-approved parklet design says completed, but that's for university, and it doesn't say that. There's no permanent parklets yet for Cal Ave, and we still, I think it has to go to the council to have that approved. I had spoken with the city manager a couple months ago, and he was receptive to have that to the council, but I don't see any action, and this item is shown as complete.
Yeah, happy to address that. That work is still underway for California Avenue. It is marked as complete when initially scoped. It was for University Avenue. The discussion about adding California Avenue followed the adoption of that objective. We can work to clarify that in future reports as necessary. And I do want to clarify that that work is underway for California Avenue.
Well, I don't know what underway means, and let me just say that it actually was always a question. It's not a new item. It's an unresolved one. And that once the council had made the decision over a year ago for permanent closure on Cal Ave, that became an urgent matter. And yet we're going into another winter where we have some combination of losing outdoor dining by some businesses and laying off of staff as a result. Other ones who are skirting the rules until they're not allowed to. And all this time, we have an anxiousness to invest in those. There was always an argument that it was dependent on the permanent streetscape design and how that might influence those parklets. But I want to see this brought forward so that there can be clear direction. As of right now, there is not clear direction to do that. And we have a question of whether the permanent parklet designs that were established for university, either as they stand or in some modified version, can quickly be applied to Cal Ave. And we haven't had that discussion here or at the council. The council has not had an opportunity to give clear direction that will allow this to move forward.
Chair Koo, I did want to note that we do have one member of the public who has their hand raised to speak, if you would like to hear that comment.
Sure.
Michael, 1 second. Let me give you permission to speak. You may begin your comment. Unmute yourself, please, Michael.
Michael, if you can hear us, you should have permission to unmute yourself and speak as you're able.
Okay, we can come back to you potentially.
Chat, and maybe he could phone in? Or his on phone?
Michael, you should be getting a request on Zoom to unmute yourself. We are not able to unmute you ourselves, but you do now have permission to unmute yourself and speak if you would like to.
All
He's lowered his hand.
Okay. We'll see what happens. One last point is that, you had that good summary of all the recent permitting activities. Not all are the same, but it in part tells at least a positive component to a story. And I'm really wondering how we translate what's in there to a narrative that gets out there to the business community, through the chamber, to the broader community, to the press. And so I'd really encourage that. I know we get components of it, that when something new happens, but putting it together and say, oh yeah, this is in the last 3 months, here's all that's happening or whatever. I think there's a value to a narrative. And that's all I had, and doesn't look like Michael's able to break through. Okay, Lydia?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, so in the staff report, it mentions that with Good City and company, we have a partnership. Can you define for me what that means? I mean, if we're contracting with them, why are we calling it a partnership?
We are contracting with them. We use them to augment staff resources. And so if there was ambiguity about that term, apologies, happy to clarify in the future. But we are, to Kylie's point, looking at the resources we have available for the scope of work we have to accomplish and figuring out how to best leverage existing resources. So leveraging some small consultant funding, we were able to help facilitate those conversations to be productive.
Right. And so let's keep it very clear that it's not a partnership. It is a consulting firm, and we're having a contract with them for them to augment our resources and using it that way. And I think on the staff part, to consistently remind that this is for the benefits of residents and to bring in business and so forth. But at the end of the day, we need to keep uses and zoning with enforcement in place as we're looking at how to move forward with all of this. I think your staff report with the conversations grouped into 3 themes, Palo Alto's reputation, number 1. We do have a reputation, and I do think that, saying that our reputation is difficult to work with, there is something to it, but then the thing is also we have to make sure that planning is done correctly for the placements of right businesses in the right locations. in addition to considering what kind of vehicle traffic that particular kind of business will bring in, which also takes into consideration, deliveries. How are we going to accommodate that on our narrow streets, especially because we have multiple uses on that street. Then also to the difficulties of getting permitting or getting the permit approved, because we do have older buildings that we value. And if it's for example, if it's a restaurant going in, originally the smaller grease traps in restaurants that may need bigger ones for whatever reason. So there are, hindrances, and just to kind of put down and say it's difficult to get into Palo Alto because of permitting approvals, I think it's a wrong theme to go down, and I would push back on that. Palo Alto is still a prime location for a lot of retailers, a lot of restaurants, so I would continue to highlight on that. And we also need to be constantly reminded, including with Good City, our consultant, that downtown, our core business districts, which includes University, California Avenue, and Midtown, where it's not Stanford Mall or Town and Country or Charleston Plaza. Those are all owned and managed by individual companies and owners, right? They're managed. So we need to remember that there are multiple owners with varying objectives for their properties and businesses. On the changing trends in retail, I believe that retail zoning still requires restrictions. We need to be again reminded, as I said earlier, of the .com times when retail businesses were leaving because their landlord raised their rents, and they relocated out of town, which means that our revenue went down, and it didn't come to us, but it went to other cities. And these retail spaces ended up becoming office spaces, which is why we have the ground floor retail preservation ordinance in place. So how not to lose that and still have emphasis for retail on our ground floors. On the constraints and barriers, I do want to, acknowledge what John Shank said about, parklets. They're valuable, they're great, but then when they extend into another storefronts and causes visibility issues, then we need to kind of take another look at that and assure all businesses are being equitable, operating fairly. So we need to extend that, and we might want to take another look at that. And I believe that we do want to make sure that ground floor retail preservation still is protected on certain streets that are mentioned. Again, we do want to make sure that we identify street by street in the downtown core what our retail base needed for foot traffic, drive-by visibility, and just shops that we stop by at a whim. I think I said most of the other things. Oh, and then there is a sense of safety in high traffic areas, including well-lit areas, right? So alleyways may need to be better lit if we're encouraging foot traffic there, and also for bicycle traffic. Explore where those are. Some areas, some of the alleyways, plantings such as bougainvillea and attractive lighting, artwork can enhance the alleyways. Our Centennial Way could use some lighting and highlighting there also. Also, exploring openness to different retail business hours for retail to coincide with dinner time and walking. As I'm meeting with the California Avenue, Gamelandia actually is very forward thinking, and they adjust their time to when the street is most busiest. So I don't know, exploring with some of the retailers, if they're willing to kind of look at their time to coincide with when the street is busy. both for California Avenue as well as for University. That might be something to look into. Make sure our communications to stakeholders have direct outreach to business owners in the business registry. So make the business registry a tool for connection with business owners and property owners. And I was wondering, are property owners registering with the business registry? This is property owners, not business owners.
No, property owners wouldn't fall within the parameters of the business registry program in terms of how it's established.
Okay.
Well, if they have a business that is
Okay.
such.
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
if they have a business, they will absolutely be registering under that.
So with our real estate office, Sunny Tong, would he be able to provide a list of the property owners in order to, moving forward, be finding a way to connect with them as well and keeping them in the loop with communications?
So the ownership of properties is available through public records with the County of Santa Clara. In terms of whether or not that has contact information is a separate point of discussion. So I think in general, we are working to leverage our resources and information through the business registry, the business tax, as well as things like permits and the reports that we just talked about today to continue to make sure we've got robust outreach and continue to increase our Rolodex of sorts for these efforts.
Okay. I just want to make sure that they are included in the communications moving forward, especially with discussions on how to revitalize downtown and California Avenue. And also, there's an internal discussion among staff, the economic development staff. I think when we're discussing the El Camino Real repaving, I don't think it gives the whole picture when you're just talking about the El Camino repaving project. I think it might be better to say El Camino repurposing project or whatever, because repaving and removing parking and putting in bicycle lanes is completely, the latter two is not addressed. It's just repaving. So I think there needs to be more transparency around that. When can we expect more information regarding rules of operating food trucks?
Hey, Lydia, can you provide some of these very kind of more granular comments in writing to staff?
Yeah, I can. I will definitely put that forward, but I did want to finish up regarding the operating food trucks and permitting process for consideration. I'd like to see that more in a report so that we can understand what staff's thinking is around that. That was all. Thank you.
Thanks. We normally would say next meeting, but we have a tentative November 20th, either the first or the second meeting on this, but a November 20th meeting, and that will likely be for 3 hours from 9 to 12. Is that tentatively, just so we get that down?
I think if at the pleasure of the committee, I think targeting 3.5 hours in case there's any public comment on any other topics, and then being able to give, roughly an hour per topic as we go through to try and avoid feeling rushed. So if that serves for the committee, we'll target that 3.5 hour time frame, and then as you articulated, nailing down dates.
And given that it's really a study session / workshop, maybe we can have refreshments, and that helps attract people and keep them from being crabby anyway. So, all right. Yeah. All right. Is Michael? Oh, okay. No. All right. Yeah. Maybe we'll get Michael in person next time. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, staff.